Most women spend years trying to be understood, but some women, quietly, mysteriously, choose something far more powerful. They choose to be felt. Have you ever wondered why a man can leave a woman's bed but not her memory? Why he can silence his mouth but not his mind? The truth is, there are moments when a man feels a woman's power without knowing why. It's not because of her words. It's not because of her actions. It's because she touched something deeper than logic, further than attraction. Carl Jung called it the anima, the invisible feminine force lodged inside every man's unconscious. She is not just his lover or his mother or his fantasy. She is the mirror of his own soul. And when a real woman in the outer world unknowingly triggers this buried symbol, his body reacts before his mind can explain it. His heart races. His stomach tightens. He feels her pull in ways that leave him both intrigued and unsettled. This is not about games. It's not about manipulation. It's about primal, archetypal memory. The feminine has always held the silent power of emotional gravity. She doesn't push. She doesn't explain. She doesn't beg to be noticed. She becomes an atmosphere, a mood he cannot escape even after she's gone. Some women awaken this without knowing it. Others learn it consciously, after they've shed the need to perform, after they've burned away the version of themselves who overcompensates, who apologizes for taking up space, who explains every boundary in fear of being misunderstood. The woman who has stepped into her silent power knows that men feel her in waves they can't quite articulate. In the stillness of her presence, she creates a mirror so clear that a man is forced to meet parts of himself he has never named, parts he may not be ready to face. He feels her when she does not seek his validation, when she smiles softly but holds her ground, when she listens but does not need to defend her decisions, when she leaves space for silence without rushing to fill it. And something ancient inside him stirs, because at his core a man senses when he is near a woman who is no longer ruled by external approval. She has graduated from the need to be agreeable. She has outgrown the addiction to explaining herself. In her detachment, he feels a strange ache, part desire, part fear. The desire comes from instinct. He wants to claim her attention, to be the exception to her calm indifference. The fear comes from his ego, which whispers, "What if you can't control this? What if you are not the center of her universe?" That's the first time he feels her power, but cannot explain why. It's not because she punished him. It's not because she played a role. It's because she chose herself in the silent spaces where most women crumble. The second time happens when she lets him experience consequences without softening the blow, when she allows him to sit in discomfort without rescuing him from it. This is the moment where he realizes she will not sacrifice her self-respect to keep the peace. And whether he admits it or not, part of him respects her more because of it. She has stopped mothering his wounds. She has stopped massaging his ego. She has stopped feeding the illusion that he holds dominion over her peace. And this, for a man, is both terrifying and magnetic. Jung would say that at this point, the man is no longer relating to the woman as she is, but to the unconscious projections she has activated in him. She becomes not just a woman, but a symbol of freedom, of danger, of everything he cannot control. And the paradox is, the less she tries to control his reaction, the deeper her power sinks into his psyche. Because real feminine power is not loud. It is not performative. It is subtle, like gravity, invisible, but undeniable. This woman, whether she knows it or not, has stepped into the role of the muse, but not in the soft, romantic sense. She becomes the mirror of his shadow, the reflection of everything he has suppressed about his own vulnerability, his longing, his fears of abandonment. And in her silence, he meets himself. The third time a man feels her power but cannot explain why happens when she chooses solitude over half-hearted connection. This is a woman who would rather sit alone in a quiet room than tolerate a relationship that drains her life force. She no longer fears loneliness because she has met it, danced with it, and emerged stronger. She knows the difference between being alone and being abandoned. One is a prison, the other is a sanctuary. Most men are not used to this. They expect the usual patterns: the woman who tolerates, accommodates, bends, and contorts herself to keep the emotional bond intact. But when he senses that she does not fear walking away, something primal awakens in him. Jung wrote that man projects his anima, the feminine within, onto the women he meets. When she is soft and compliant, he feels safe, in control. But when she is sovereign, self-contained, and willing to detach, she becomes the embodiment of his unconscious longing for wholeness and his deepest fear of rejection. She no longer explains why she needs space. She does not send anxious texts to soothe his discomfort. She simply chooses herself without ceremony, and this unsettles him more than any words could. At this moment, his ego whispers that he's losing her, but his shadow knows the truth. He never owned her to begin with, and in that realization, he feels her power as a quiet force that refuses to be tamed. The fourth time he feels it is in the subtle shift of energy when she stops performing. Most relationships begin with silent negotiations. The woman smiles more than she wants to. She laughs at jokes that don't land. She accepts behaviors she should question. She explains her heart in ways that leave her drained, because she has been conditioned to believe that love is earned through sacrifice. But when a woman awakens, when she sees through the layers of ego games and emotional politics, she stops performing. She becomes real, grounded, fully present in her own skin. And this shakes a man more than any confrontation. He feels it in the texture of her silence, in the way she no longer tries to impress him, in the way she sits across from him with soft eyes but firm boundaries, refusing to mold herself into his expectations. At first, he may interpret this as distance. He might accuse her of being cold, detached, or difficult. But deep down, he knows he is not dealing with a woman who is punishing him. He is dealing with a woman who has reclaimed herself. This is the woman who no longer plays by the unspoken social rules that tell her to be small, to soften her truth, to dilute her presence to make others comfortable. She has crossed the threshold into individuation, the sacred psychological process Jung described as becoming whole, not perfect. And a man cannot help but feel this shift. It destabilizes the old script where the woman needs him to feel complete. Now the roles are reversed. He finds himself needing her validation, craving her attention, wondering why her absence feels louder than her words ever did. The fifth time he feels her power but cannot explain why is when she lets him live with his own choices. This is perhaps the hardest for him to understand because it violates every expectation he's been taught about emotional labor. Most men unconsciously expect a woman to smooth over the rough edges of their decisions, to soften consequences, to explain their own feelings so thoroughly that he never has to face discomfort. But this woman has evolved past that dynamic. She does not correct him. She does not coddle him. She does not chase after him to make sure he understands the weight of his actions. She lets life do that for her. And when he finally feels the silence, when he sits alone and realizes she's not coming back to clarify or comfort, he feels something deeper than guilt. He feels growth, because it is in her absence that he meets the most dangerous and transformative version of feminine energy, the woman who teaches him through non-action, through letting go, through allowing him to encounter his own reflection without interference. This is not cruelty, it is sacred discipline. It is the moment when a man finally realizes that her power was never about control. It was about truth. The sixth time a man feels her power but cannot explain why is when she stops fearing his withdrawal. Most women are subtly trained to dread the moment when a man pulls away. The cold text, the delayed reply, the sudden silence that arrives without warning, leaving her heart suspended between anxiety and hope. For centuries, this dynamic has played out in the shadows of relationships. The woman senses distance and instinctively moves closer, tries harder, explains more. She fears that if she does not fill the silence, she will be forgotten. But when a woman reaches a certain depth of self-awareness, she stops chasing closeness in the face of his withdrawal. She lets him disappear if he must. She does not rush to soothe his ego or prove her worth. She understands something most never do, that real love cannot be forced, and distance reveals more than proximity ever could. Carl Jung warned of the anima's projection, the way a man unconsciously assigns emotional responsibility to the woman, expecting her to carry both his desire and his rejection fears. But the woman who has done her shadow work knows this trap. She does not collapse into panic when he turns away. She watches. She observes. She lets the silence speak for itself. And in that moment, he feels her power. Not because she punished him, not because she threatened to leave, but because she no longer clings to his presence as the source of her safety. He may not understand why his own distancing feels less powerful than it once did. He may wonder why pulling away no longer evokes desperation, why silence is no longer a tool of control. It is because she has transcended the old game. The seventh and final time a man feels her power but cannot explain why is when she becomes a mirror rather than a sponge. Most women are conditioned to absorb a man's projections, his frustrations, his insecurities, his unresolved childhood wounds. She takes them in, believing it is her role to fix, to heal, to repair what others have broken. But the woman who has stepped into her true feminine power no longer operates from this place. She knows that carrying a man's emotional weight is not love. It is self-abandonment. So she stops absorbing. She reflects. When he brings chaos, she does not engage in the storm. She becomes the still surface of the lake, quietly returning his reflection without distortion. This is unnerving for him. A man who is used to women rescuing him, softening his sharp edges, and validating his ego, cannot easily handle a woman who simply holds up the mirror. But this is what real feminine power does. It illuminates the truth, even when it's uncomfortable. She lets him see who he is without judgment, but also without interference. She does not rush to fix him, nor does she make his problems her own. This is where her power lies. In the refusal to be anyone's emotional sponge, in the sacred act of standing still while others unravel, in the quiet grace of allowing reality to reveal itself. And here is where the deepest shift happens. He feels drawn to her because she represents something no one else does, a chance to meet his shadow, to confront his own reflection, to break the cycle of projection, and finally integrate the parts of himself he has long disowned. But he also fears her for the same reason, because to love a woman like this requires a man to grow. It requires him to move beyond control and into self-mastery, to stop blaming, to stop deflecting, to stop avoiding the real work. It requires him to step into his own individuation, the lifelong journey Jung described as becoming whole, not through power over others, but through power over oneself. Most will not take this path, but the few who do will discover something profound, that the woman who makes him feel powerless is not his enemy. She is his initiation. And for the woman who lives in this energy, there is no need to chase, explain, or prove, because she knows the truth of her worth. The woman who knows her worth doesn't chase, she chooses.